Hi Martin, thanks for coming on the podcast. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. And you, Ethan?
Yeah, I'm fine, thank you. Yeah. Um,
Good.
we'll get straight into the podcast. Um, so you were born on the 24th of September 1960. What was life like for you growing up in the 60s and 70s?
That was a long, long time ago, 1960. Yeah, the 60s and 70s were amazing, amazing times. Amazing for music. There was a lot of really good music about in the 60s and 70s. It was fun being a kid back then because you just used to play out constantly and play football, and you were never in a house. I mean, today kids tend to um, spend a lot of time at home and in their bedrooms. I suppose that's a good thing if you're learning a musical instrument or something. But you didn't used to get overweight kids and that back then because kids used to get loads and loads of exercise. Um, my parents emigrated to Africa when I was 4 years old, so I spent the early part of my youth in the sunshine, going surfing and stuff.
Yeah,
Uh, and then my older brother got me into music. And after that, I wasn't interested in football or surfing or anything anymore. I was just solely interested in music.
how old were you when you got into music then?
I would say when I got into it quite heavily would have been about 11 or 12 years old. Um, I mean, my brother used to buy a lot of records, and I was surrounded by music with him, really. So I was listening to music from an early age through his record collection. But I think probably when I became a teenager, I remember going to someone's party and seeing a Led Zeppelin album at this party, and I thought, I want that. And I was really naughty and I stole it. And I think that, you know, seeing other older people's record collections and wanting a record collection of my own and not being able to afford records at the time, it was a bit naughty stealing someone's record, but it was sort of the start of my own record collection.
Yeah, yeah. What age were you when you started to learn how to play music?
Um, I'd say, well, I bought my first guitar when I was 15. But my brother showed me a few things on guitar when I was younger. Oh no, sorry, I tell a lie because I played trumpet in the brass band.
All right, yeah.
So I would have been playing trumpet from the age of 11. Yeah. So I started music when I was 11.
All
And
right,
obviously,
yeah.
when you learn to play a brass instrument, and it was in the brass band at school, you learn the basics of reading music and the basics of scales and things like that. So yeah, I was 11 when I started. It's funny how I got that wrong because I considered me starting when I bought a guitar and got into punk music. I sort of don't think about the playing in the brass band at school.
Why? Because guitars are cooler than playing in a brass band.
I don't know. It just doesn't seem to be on my radar. But yeah, I have to think about that one.
So then when did A Certain Ratio come about? How long after was that?
Well, I was in another band first. I was in a band called Alien Tin that
No.
were a bit like a glam punk band. And I played with them for a year or so. They were based in Stockport and we did a few gigs. with Alien Tint. We did a recording, and we were members of the Musicians Collective at Band on the Wall in Manchester. And every week, bands who were in the collective they'd go to meetings every fortnight, and at the meeting they decide who was going to play each week. And the first time we played at Alien Tint, it was Alien Tint and A Cetain Ratio, and
No,
another, I can't remember the other band. So when it was Jez's first gig, so it was Pete, Simon, and Jez. There were only three of them in the band, and they were watching Alien Tint, and they were looking at me and thinking, that guy looks out of place there. It looks like us. And then when I watched A Cetain Ratio, I thought, I'd like to be in that band. They're more of the sort of thing that that I'm into.
yeah.
And after the gig, they said, "Do you want to join our band?" So I said, "Yeah, all right." And the singer from Alien Tint, we were putting the gear back in the van, and he wasn't helping or something, and I had a bit of an argument with him, and then I said, "It doesn't matter anyway, because I'm fucking leaving. I'm joining A Cetain Ratio."
You said that you lived in South Africa for a bit. When you
Yeah,
came back, were you 15 when you came back to England?
15. Yeah.
Is that when punk were just starting to kick off then at that point?
Yeah, well, no, it wasn't quite started yet because it was 1975 when I came back. And punk started in 76,
So
sort
just,
of.
yeah.
So when I came back, I might have gone. I think I went to see Uriah Heep, who were like a proper heavy metal band at the Free Trade Hall. I went to see Bebop Deluxe. I went to see Ultravox in the first incarnation before Midge, or when they were good,
Hmm.
and then punk happened. So after that, I was only into punk music for maybe 2 years, or a year and just over a year, and then it punk went really mainstream, and as soon as it started getting in the charts, everyone that was a punk at the start just wasn't interested in it anymore. And that's
Yeah.
how post-punk music came about, because it was people it was people who'd come from the punk era with a punk attitude, but wanted to make music that wasn't like punk.
Yeah, yeah. Well, on A Cetain Ratio, my favorite thing about them is that you um, don't stick to one genre. You have different genres, going to different genres. Was that something you set out from the start, or did it just happen like that?
No, we never intentionally wanted to play multiple genres of music. It's just the fact that we were into all these different genres of music.
Yeah.
Uh, I'm just going to turn my phone on airplane mode. Sorry, I should
No,
have
no
done this
worries.
before. Okay, there we go. Yeah, we never intended to. We never set out to play multiple genres. It's just the genres that we play reflect our own record collections and our own taste in music. And the fact that we like so many different types of music means that we make many different types of music.
Yeah.
And sometimes we'll intentionally set out to do a song in the style of, like,
Mm.
we might um you know I might think, right, I want to do an Afrobeat tune, and I'll start developing an Afrobeat tune that'll turn out like an ACR bastardized version of an Afrobeat tune. But the intention was to make an Afrobeat tune. or we might want to do something that's quite Brazilian, and we'll intentionally set out to sort of make something that's Brazilian, or we might want to do something that's quite techno-y. So yeah, we do set out to do songs in the style of, but the fact that we do all these different styles, we're not just trying to make different styles. We just like so many different types of music that we want to make all those different styles of music, you know.
Yeah, yeah. A Certain Ratio were one of the first bands that Tony Wilson signed to Factory. What was that like getting a record deal?
Well, with Factory Records, you didn't get a record deal. You didn't sign to them. You just started making records with them. There was no contract in place. But yeah, it was an amazing experience for young lads like us, having someone like Tony Wilson be really into our music and actually ask if he could manage us, you know.
Yeah,
So the first thing is I can't actually remember whether he asked us if he could manage us first or if he said, "Do you want to make a record first?" I'm not sure which way around it was, or if they both happened around the same time, where he said, "I'd like to manage you." And around the same time, he said, "Do you want to make a record? Because
yeah,
I've started a record label and I think you could make a really good record, you know."
yeah,
Because
yeah. Sorry,
he'd
go on.
seen he'd seen us play live a few times, so he knew all the songs and he knew what he wanted as a single. And he wanted All Night Party and Thin Boys, because those were his two favorite tunes at the time. He wanted them as a double A-sided single. So that was the first single that came out on Factory Records. There was
Yeah,
a record that came out before that, but that was an EP, and that was a factory sampler which had four different bands on, I think. Um, so ours was the first record by a band on Factory Records, and he'd only just come up with the idea of the label. He'd got an inheritance off his dad, I think, and he wanted to invest that into starting a label because he really, really loved music and he just wanted to be involved. He had the factory club that he ran with Alan Erasmus, and which had bands on every week. And his extension of that was finding a label to put records out by some of the bands that he was putting on at the club.
he's a bit of a legend in Manchester, isn't he, Tony Wilson?
Yeah, he is a legend. I mean, people in Manchester can tend to sort of, live in the past, but Tony Wilson is he's such a big part of Manchester. Um, he in Manchester, the things that Manchester have got going for it are football, two great football teams. Well, one's not as good as the other one
Who,
now,
who do you
unfortunately.
support?
Man United.
No.
And then music, and I think, both those things really put Manchester on the map in the 80s and 90s. And Tony Wilson used to run a music convention called In the City. He had the Hacienda. Early on, he had the factory. And he did so much for Manchester. And he used to get really annoyed with Manchester City Council because they didn't put anything into the music scene or that side of the arts. And he used to have meetings with them all the time and say, "Listen, we're doing so much for Manchester. You need to support us and realize what good it's doing Manchester." But at the time, the council never listened to him. So he ran the In the City music event and he did it all off his own back. He wanted council funding. I think he might have got some in the end towards the tail end of it, but the start they weren't interested, you know. And he just did so much for Manchester. It
Yeah.
wouldn't be the same place without him.
No, no. Um, at that time, so the 80s, sorry, the 70s going into the 80s, there were a lot of bands in Manchester like the Smiths, The Fall, Joy Division and New Order. Then later on, Happy Mondays and Stone Roses. Did you get along with these bands or did you see them as competition?
Yeah, in Manchester's a small place, you know. All the musicians knew each other and everyone got on with each other. In fact, I mean, we started out with Joy Division, a New Order. New Order did their first ever gig supporting A Cetain Ratio. Um, and before that, Joy Division and A Cetain Ratio and Jeruti Column and Section 25 used to do a lot of gigs together, traveling around the UK. So we were like a family. And then when before the Stone Roses formed, they used to come to ACR gigs and stand at the front, and
Really?
they were really into A Cetain Ratio. Um, you know, we're good friends with Johnny Marr. Yeah, everyone knows each other. That it was there was a lot of competition as well, obviously,
Mm.
because you know, you always want to do better than your rivals. It's a bit like sport, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
But unfortunately, with ACR, we never had the commercial success that a lot of the other successful bands had. And in a way, I put it down to us changing all the time, which people can't latch onto, you know.
Yeah.
Whereas with bands like, say, New Order, they never really changed that much, or the Smiths, or well, Stone Roses didn't really make that many records, did they? But
Two records, weren't
they
they?
had great success with them. But
Yeah.
yeah, Oasis as well, you know, very, very samey, the music. And I think part of our downfall is we've never made linear music that's the same all the time. What we should have done is have a hit and then stick with that sort of style. But yeah, we're too into music and into what we do, um, and never really think too much about our audience or our or the marketing of the band. 'Cause that always comes secondary, you know.
Yeah, well, it's probably better to do what you want to do uh, than what would make you commercially successful.
Yeah.
Um, I'm a big fan of Joy Division, and Ian Curtis is somewhat of like a mythical figure now, isn't he? But what were he like when you spoke to him? And
He was just a very normal guy like the rest of Joy Division were. Jokers, japers, um, you know, especially back then in the 70s, it was all, you know, it was a bit laddish, the whole scene. Um, he was quite funny. He was he was quite quiet, but he when you're in you know that factory family, everyone was friends with each other. Um, there's an interview with Ian where he says his favorite factory band is A Cetain Ratio, which was very good of him.
yeah,
Um, and you know he was okay at first, but as they sort of did more and more gigs and got more popular, he seemed to get less well, and his epilepsy sort of got worse and worse, and it's tended to come on at gigs. So yeah, he wasn't well towards the end,
Yeah,
and I think the illness also um didn't help his mental health either, which in the end sort of killed him really. So yeah, it's very sad. But it was a good journey at the start until Ian started getting ill.
yeah, it's a shame that really, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
it was a very short-lived career, really. Um, you know, and it's really commendable how Joy Division, how the members that were left then formed New Order and went
yeah.
on carried on what they were doing, which is what Ian would have wanted.
I think I saw an interview with Tony Wilson saying if he were still alive and they'd carried on, that they'd have been as big as Pink Floyd. Do you believe that? Well, I
Well,
think Pink Floyd he
you
said.
can never tell, really. They might have broken up and never done anything.
Well,
You
yeah,
don't know. You don't know. Anything could have happened, really. But no, I mean, Ian was a brilliant front man. He was a brilliant lyricist, and yeah, who knows what Joy Division could have done.
yeah.
Yeah,
In 1979, you released your debut album, and then a few months after that, you went on a tour supporting Talking Heads. How was that?
that was great. Yeah, really good. It opened our eyes to what being a professional band was really like because we got to see one every night. Instead of playing with the usual crew like Joey Division, Girotti Column, Section 25, we were playing with these people from New York who did the business every night, in front of 2,000 people. Yeah, and it taught us a lot. It was a really good experience.
Good, good. How many people were you playing to before that tour then?
We played the Lyceum in London to like 900 people, or we played no, Glastonbury came after that. But yeah, we were doing decent sized gigs on the factory package, of 3 to 900 people.
Yeah, yeah. In
It
1980.
was,
Oh,
it was a
sorry.
lot bigger for us. Yeah, it was a lot bigger for us, the Talking Heads tour.
Oh, yeah. In 1980, you went and lived in America, in New York to record your debut album. What was that like?
Well, we didn't actually live there. We went and stayed there for 6 weeks, I think, and hired a loft in Tribeca. Tony Wilson asked us, we all had day jobs, and he said, "What do you think about going to New York to record your first album?" And we all looked at each other and thought, "Well, that's a no-brainer. Of course, we want to go there." So he says, "You're going to have to give up your day jobs because you're not going to be able to get that much time off work." And we went on a wage then, but yeah, he Tony's idea was for because we were getting into like funk music and stuff. He thought that going to New York would do us the world of good and recording there, and it did because every night where we weren't working or recording, we'd be out watching. Uh, we'd go and see a salsa band. We'd go and see a Brazilian band. We'd go to a nightclub, and we just saw all these different types of music, and it just really inspired us.
It was New York that started off that kind of hacienda, like started the hacienda in Manchester, wasn't it? The music in New York.
Yeah, well, it was going out because we went. A Certain Ratio went there before New Order, then New Order went there. But going to all these nightclubs like the Ritz, and then later on the Danceteria, and then the Loft and places like that. And just they were on a much bigger scale than existed in Manchester, and we just it was just like, why haven't we got this in Manchester? And obviously, we were thinking that. Tony Wilson was thinking that. Rob Gretton was thinking that when he went there with New Order. And that sort of planted the seed about starting a club like that in Manchester.
Yeah, yeah. Whilst you're in New York, is it true that Madonna's first ever gig was supporting A Cetain Ratio?
That's right. That was at the Danceteria. Um, and it was our end of tour party. I think we did 2 nights. But yeah, she supported us.
Did you think she was going to go on to do what she did that night, or?
Yeah, she was really good. She could tell she was a star. She had Jelly Bean with her. He had a 4-track tape machine, and he started the set off by pressing go on the tape machine. And the music just sounded really good and current, and the sort of thing that you'd hear on WBLS radio in New York. And she just blew up after that.
Yeah, she played at the Hacienda as well, didn't she?
She did, yeah.
Were you there that night?
I think so. I can't remember, but that was for the Tube. It was a TV program called The Tube, and
It
she did
were
that.
first.
She only mimed though.
Oh, we're only miming.
Yeah,
It were a first UK appearance, I think, wasn't
it was. Yeah,
it? Speaking of the Hacienda, you must have some stories about that place.
yeah, um, yeah. It went through many phases. I mean, when it first started, it was a great live music venue, and a lot of the bands that we were seeing in the States would get booked at the Hacienda. So we were seeing a lot of stuff from America and that. And there were gigs on all the time, but it was struggling. And the DJ at the time was Hugh Clark, who we used to take on tour with us. In fact, it was because Hugh used to come on tour with us that they got him to be the DJ at the Hacienda. And he was the first DJ. He was like a really good funk, soul, Latin DJ. He's sort of inspired us a lot in the music that we liked. And even though it was really good on Friday and Saturday nights, they just didn't get the place absolutely rammed. And it wasn't until Acid House came along in 87, well, even 86, it was building up to it with electro and that sort of thing. But then when the ecstasy arrived, it just one night there was 4 people on ecstasy. Next time there was 8, then there was 16, then there was 32. Before you knew it, the whole place was just buzzing. And yeah, it took off in the way that it had club night on Wednesday night, Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night, and it would be rammed every night.
Yeah.
It still didn't make any money because people stopped buying drinks because they just wanted water.
Jeez, yeah. From 1979 to 1981, you worked with producer Martin Hannett. What was he like?
Yeah, he was pretty crazy. He was quite intense. We recorded the Graveyard with him, and also our first proper studio album, Two Each, in New York, and an EP with Flight and Blown Away on, which is really good. But in a way, his production on Two Each, everyone used to say, "Oh, you're much better live than on record," because he gave us quite a gothic sound that he made everyone sound the same. Section 25, New Order, sorry, Joy Division, us. We'd
Yeah.
all have that gothic sound, and it didn't quite suit us. Most successful record was the next album, Sextet, that we produced ourselves. So it was great working with Martin, but um, he wasn't sort of right for the type of music we were making.
Yeah, yeah. In 24-hour Party People, do you think the actor played him well? Like, is that what he was like?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In Circus, is it Circus? Yeah, he was really good, and also Rob Gretton, who was played by
Is that the way? Oh, I can't remember his name either.
yeah, I'll tell you now. There's a few different. Paddy Considine.
Oh yeah, I don't think of him. I'm thinking of the one in Control.
No, no. Paddy was brilliant as Rob Gretton. Yeah, I mean, in fact, it was quite scary because I was the musical director on the film, and when I was with Paddy, I just kept on thinking I was with Rob. You know.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well, that's a good thing then, really, isn't it?
yeah, yeah. But it was great.
In 1987, he signed with A&M Records, and one of your first singles with them was the Biggie. That's my favorite A Certain Ratio song, actually.
Right.
Um,
Should have been a hit really, but and it was doing all right. Started off really well, and they had another band called Dimitri, who they'd had a hit with before, who had a single out the same week as us, and their marketing PR department said, right, you've got to pull all stops on the Dimitri record to the A&M team. So they stopped pushing our record, and Dimitri uh, was a hit. But yeah, it was. We intentionally made an album that we thought would be radio friendly. But unfortunately, at the same time, A&M were on a downward decline, and they were sacking people left, right, making people redundant left, right, and centre. Um, and we made an album that was pretty good. Cost a lot of money. And then we made another album that didn't cost anything called ACI which was, which was really good. And then A&M dropped us, and shortly after they dropped us, they they folded. But it was really funny. We on ACIMCR, there's an opening track, and it's called Manic. And the reason it's called Manic is it's just a manic piece of music. It's absolutely crazy. And the A&M, or the big bods, came down to the studio to listen to the new album. We played it, then we put it on the large monitors in Strawberry really loud and played this track Manic, which pinned them to the back of the wall. And we just knew that they wouldn't like it, which is why we did it. Yeah, yeah, but that album was too left field for them. For
yeah,
us, it was a bit of a reaction to the really commercial album. The really commercial album that we put our hearts into, and really, really tried to make it work, because they messed up and just weren't interested in it. We just thought, well, that was a waste of time. Let's go
yeah.
back to making something that's totally opposite to that, which is how ACI/MCR came about.
Um, well, you left Factory Records to go there. Did you know that Factory Records are coming to an end as well?
We did. We released an album called Force on Factory. We didn't no, we didn't know Factory. We left Factory long before they came to an end. And it was in 86, 87. And we'd done an album called Force for them. And we went to tour in Europe. We went to do a massive tour, actually, 6 weeks tour that we timed with the release of the album. And every country we got to in Europe, the album wasn't out there yet. It had been delayed. So it was almost a waste of time as touring. So when we went back to the UK, we weren't very happy because we'd done our job, we'd made the
Yeah,
album, we'd set up this big tour to promote it, and they'd just not got the record out on time. So, and they owed us money. So in the end, we just came to an agreement and said, right, okay, we, we'll 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 go elsewhere, but because you owe us money, we're going to take all our masters. And we just went into the factory offices and boxed up all our multi tracks, our masters, and took them away with us, which was a really good move because from that date, we owned all that music that we'd done before.
yeah,
Uh, that's how we can release it on labels like Mute, on Soul Jazz, on Creation. You know, our records have been re-released on lots of different labels, and we benefit directly from that. Otherwise, we would have just been stuck on London records like Joy Division and New Order and other acts were.
yeah, yeah. There was a big change in the music scene from the 80s into the 90s. What was the 90s like for you?
The 90s was brilliant. It was we had a studio in Ancoats and we were on Rob's Records and we made two albums for Rob's. But because we had a studio that I'd built with the advance that we got off A&M, which was a really good investment from our part because it kept us alive for a few years because we used to hire it out and I used to produce lots of people there. I used to do remixes for Rob's and it kept us ticking over really. So the 90s was good for us because we were with Rob, someone who'd always supported us. But it was just also a good time for going out and raving and going to parties and you know, lots of parties and illegal raves everywhere. Yeah, it was a great time.
Good, good. Um, Back onto A Certain Ratio in 2020, you brought out your first album in 12 years. How did that come about?
It came about because we signed we signed a back catalogue deal with Mute, which meant that all our back catalogue was going to be re-released by them. It was never intended to make a new record with that deal, but Paul at Mute he asked us if we do a rework of a Barry Adamson track that we did, and that got on playlisted on Six Music uh, on the radio. We started getting asked by lots of other people to do reworks. So we spent a lot of time in the studio making other people's tunes sound good, you know.
Yeah,
And it just gave us it sort of we reserved our time in the studio and learned a lot very quickly and thought, wow, this is great being in the studio again. And then Paul at Mute said, "Well, let's do a compilation album. Do you think you could put a new tune on the compilation album?" So we said, "Yeah, of course we could." So we went in the studio. We wrote two new tunes. Went in the studio, recorded them, and that went on our compilation album with Mute. And that gave us a real bug for going back in the studio and we just started recording. So the money that we were getting off selling the back catalogue, we were investing into recording. We recorded one track, then two, then three, then four. Before you knew it, we had a whole album together. And we said to me, you know, we've got some really good new stuff. And then Daniel Miller came to um, he came to DJ at our 40th anniversary and we said, "Listen, Daniel, we've got a really top album here, and we'd love you to put it out." And that Monday after, we got a call off Paul saying, "Right, let's get this album sorted and get it out," and
Yeah.
that's how that came about.
Yeah, in the same year you lost your bandmate Denise Johnson. That was a big loss for you and the band, wasn't it?
It was a massive loss for us. Fortunately, that year, as soon as we finished recording ACR Loco, we had a weekend left in the studio, so we invited Denise and Matt and everyone in, and said, "Right, let's just make some music." And we recorded 4 songs in the weekend, and that was the first EP that we released after ACR Locos. So, we were fortunate that we'd made that album and that EP with Denise before she passed away, because we'd been doing a lot of gigs with her over the years, and we hadn't recorded with her since the Rob's Records stuff. So I think if we hadn't have worked together on that final stuff, it would have made losing her even more difficult, because we have actually got something of Denise.
Yeah,
Our latest releases, or on those releases, that it's made it all a lot easier for us, because she sort of lives on in those recordings. It was a massive loss for us. It was very, very sudden. And yeah, it's taken a while to get over. It's obviously 3 years later now. We'll still never totally get over it, but it's a lot easier now than it was back then in 2020.
yeah. Sorry for your loss.
Yeah, thank you.
Earlier this year, you brought out your latest album, 1982. You've done a tour for that album with your new lineup, which is looking strong. So, what's next for A Cetain Ratio?
We recorded another album in June with Dan Carey, of Speedy Wonderground fame. We went to his studio in London. We've recorded an album there, which is coming out next April. So, and that sounds really good. So we're really excited about that. Let me just show you. One sec. I got the test press in the other day. There it is.
Oh, good, yeah.
Album ready to go.
What's the album called?
I'm not sure if we can divulge the name of it yet.
All
We
right.
can we can tell you that there's a new album.
Good,
That
good.
that's about the only information we can give you at this point.
All right. Yeah. When did you say it was out? Next year?
Yeah, next year, early next year. Yeah.
All right. Good. Yeah, yeah. So my final question is: you've had a career spanning over 40 years. What's your personal highlight?
Well, it's spanning over 45 years. Over 40 years, you mean? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
My personal highlight has been the last year or so. I'm working with really talented young musicians like Ellen Beth Abdi and Viv Griffin, who both playing with us at the moment.
Yeah.
Uh, for me, being at this stage in our career, um, and being able to work with young Manchester talent like that I would have never thought that I'd be doing that at this age. The other thing that's a highlight for me is since 2020 and releasing ACR Loco, then releasing the 3 EPs, then releasing 1982. So two top albums, three really good EPs, and now we've got the third album in the bag.
Yeah.
For me, the last 3 years have felt like we've done more in that 3 years than we've done in our whole career. So the recent period for me has been a massive highlight, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Would you say bringing all that music out is a bit of a release for the loss of Denise, like something to focus on?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And it's really, like I said before, the fact that Denise is on ACR Loco and the first EP, and we also released a couple of singles from that EP. You know, I'm so glad that we got to make some top music again with Denise. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
it's a shame she isn't here for the later stuff, but getting Ellen in the band, what we didn't want was we didn't want someone who was like Denise, because Denise is not, she's irreplaceable,
Yeah.
but someone new who could step into her boots, who was totally different and could, you know, take it somewhere else, which Ellen's done a great job of.
Yeah, when I saw you playing earlier this year, she's a really good singer, isn't she?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
She's, well, she's a really good musician. She's a great keyboard player. She's a great songwriter. She's a
Yeah,
great
yeah.
lyricist. Yeah, she's an all-round musician. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's the end of the interview. So, but thank you for coming on. I appreciate it.
Okay, it's been good talking to you, Ethan. I enjoyed it.
Thank